As the great host continued its measured advance against the routes of Rumelia, the sea breeze carried salt and promise across the hills, mingling with the steady rhythm of marching feet and rolling wagons. Orhan Sahib rode at the forefront, his posture unyielding, eyes scanning the distant blue horizon where new challenges waited like unseen storms. The victories in the mountain passes had strengthened their hold, yet every league brought fresh reports of stirring powers beyond the waters, Venetian merchants whispering in distant courts, Genoese captains eyeing Ottoman gains with envy, and scattered remnants of the old regime still clinging to fading hopes of restoration. Days turned into weeks of disciplined progress. Outposts rose along the route, modest fortresses of stone and timber where Ottoman banners now flew proudly. Local villagers, weary of old tyrannies, came forward with cautious hope, offering grain and information in exchange for fair governance. Orhan Sahib listened to each delegation personally, his voice carrying the weight of justice. We do not come as conquerors seeking slaves, but as bearers of order. Pay what is due, live by honor, and you shall find protection beneath these banners. In the heart of the column, Abdul Rahman and Princess Alina rode side by side, their bond no longer hidden in shadows but acknowledged with quiet respect by the warriors around them. During the long hours of travel, they spoke of futures beyond the march. I have left behind the silk and gold of my father's court, Alina said one afternoon as their horses walked along a cliff path overlooking the sparkling sea, yet I have never felt richer. You have shown me a different kind of strength, one rooted in faith rather than fear. Abdul Rahman looked at her with deep affection, the sun glinting off his armor. And you have shown me that mercy can be as sharp as any blade. The night you opened Iodo's gates changed more than the course of battle, it changed my heart. With the Sultan's blessing, when we reach the next secure outpost, I wish to make our union official before Allah and men. A simple ceremony fitting for these times of war. Alina's hand brushed his, a small but meaningful gesture. I accept with all my being, let our lives together become another bridge between what was and what will be. That evening, around the glowing campfires, Orhan Sahib granted his formal blessing. He placed his hands upon both their shoulders, his voice solemn and warm. You have both through fire and chosen honor. Abdul Rahman, your loyalty has been a pillar. Princess Alina, your courage has saved lives. May your union strengthen our cause and bring new light to these lands. Let it be witnessed under the stars tonight. The simple ceremony took place beneath the open sky with Burhan Faladios, Evanos, and several captains standing as witnesses. Prayers rose pure and heartfelt as Abdul Rahman and Alina exchanged vows of loyalty, protection, and shared faith. Fatima, receiving word by swift rider back in the main Rumelian stronghold, sent her joyful blessings, her own child now close to entering the world. The march pressed onward. Burhan Faladios led scouting parties that cleared minor threats from forested valleys, his blade swift and his commands decisive. No mercy for those who still serve tyranny, he would declare before each engagement. Yet he honored Orhan's orders to spare those who surrendered. Evernos coordinated supply lines from the growing fortress, ensuring the host remained strong and fed as they pushed further along the coast. One misty morning, as the column descended into a wide coastal plain, new intelligence arrived, a fortified town still held by a stubborn Byzantine lord who refused to accept the changing order. He had gathered 300 defenders and called upon distant allies for support. Orhan Sahib surveyed the town's walls from afar and made his decision. We offer terms first, he commanded. Send a messenger under white banner. Tell them Orhan Sahib brings justice, not destruction. Open the gates and live in peace. Resist and the consequence will be their own. The Lord's arrogant refusal came swiftly. At dawn the following day, the Ottomans moved with purpose. Burhan Faladios struck the eastern gate with concentrated force, his riders breaking through the outer defenses in a sharp, decisive assault. Abdul Rahman led a secondary thrust from the west, his axe clearing resistance as flames rose from enemy supply posts. Orhan himself directed the center, his presence inspiring the warriors to fight with discipline rather than rage. The fighting lasted only until midday. The Lord, seeing his cause lost, surrendered with his remaining men. Orhan entered the town on foot, ordering immediate care for the wounded and fair treatment for the civilians. Let this place become an example, he declared in the central square. Tyranny ends here, justice begins. With the town secured and its people gradually warming to the new rule, the hosts rested briefly. Abdul Rahman and Alina walked the newly raised battlements together at dusk, the sea shimmering below them. Our first victory as husband and wife, he said softly, a rare smile touching his lips. Alina leaned against him. May it be the first of many peaceful days amid the storms. Yet peace remained elusive. Riders from the north brought urgent news. A larger coalition was forming, backed by foreign ships and gold. Old enemies of the rising Ottoman power had begun to stir in earnest. Orhan Sahib listened gravely in his command tent, then addressed his captains with unwavering resolve. We have secured Iodos, we have rooted ourselves in Rumelia. Now the sea itself tests us. Prepare the host. We will meet this new threat before it reaches our shores. Abdul Rahman, you will command a wing. Burhan, lead the vanguard as always. Evernos, strengthen the rear fortresses. Fatima, guard our heartland with wisdom. Word reached Fatima in the main stronghold as her labor began. She gave birth to a healthy son under the protection of strong walls, naming him in honor of the legacy they all served. Evernos held the child with pride, whispering promises of a greater empire. As the main host prepared once more for war, Orhan Sahib stood alone upon a high cliff overlooking the sea at night. The waves crashed below like the heartbeat of destiny itself. O Allah, the merciful, the wise, he prayed, voice rising into the wind, you have brought us this far. Grant us strength for the trials ahead. Let our swords defend the innocent. Let our hearts remain pure.
Peace be upon you, dear viewers. In the opening of this episode, we find ourselves within the mighty walls of the Bursa Palace, where the corridors are long and lit by the dim flicker of oil lamps, and the shadows move like restless spirits across the stone. Mahmud stands inside the chamber of Alauddin, and the air between them is heavy, thick with the memory of old mistakes and the fragile hope of something newly mended. Alauddin looks upon Mahmud with eyes that carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken warnings, and he says to him, "You did well, Mahmud. You corrected your course, but do not make that mistake again." His voice is not loud. It does not need to be. It carries the authority of a man who has watched too many trusted souls fall to their own recklessness. Mahmud stands straight, unbowed, and he answers with the quiet fire of a man who knows his own mind. He says, "I see truth and I see falsehood, and I act according to what my eyes reveal. Do not press me either, Alauddin. Do not place upon my shoulders a burden of silence when the world around us screams with deception." There is a pause between them, a breath held by the very stones of the chamber, and in that silence there lives the fragile understanding of two men who have walked different roads to the same destination. And then the door opens, slowly, gently, and Goncha steps inside. She carries with her the scent of rosewater and the unmistakable aura of a woman who has suffered much but refuses to let suffering define her. Mahmud sees her and his entire bearing changes. The hardness in his jaw softens, the steel in his eyes melts. He whispers her name, "My Goncha." And Goncha, upon seeing her brother standing there, feels a tremor pass through her, a tremor of surprise and of something older, something buried deep beneath years of estrangement and hurt. Mahmud steps toward her and says, "Praise be to Allah, you have taken your child into your arms. You have embraced your own blood, and now let me embrace mine. Come, let me hold you the way I once did, when we were young and the world had not yet torn us apart." And he opens his arms, and Goncha, after the briefest hesitation, steps into them. He wraps his arms around her, and in that embrace there lives the ghost of every argument, every cold silence, every door slammed shut between them over the long and bitter years. He holds her tightly and says, "The enmity is over. It is finished. Come, let me press you to my chest one more time." And he does. He holds her again, and this time his eyes close, and upon his face there appears something rare, something almost sacred, the expression of a man allowing himself to feel without armor. Goncha pulls back slightly. She looks into his eyes, searching for the truth behind his words, and she asks him, "You will not play another game, will you, Mahmud Saab? You will not draw me close only to cast me away again, because I have stood at that door before. I have knocked upon it with bleeding knuckles. I have called your name into the darkness of your silence and received nothing in return. Every time I reached out, I was rejected. Every time I tried to build a bridge, the planks were pulled away beneath my feet. And now you stand here with open arms and you ask me to believe." Mahmud's face tightens, not with anger, but with the pain of recognition. He says, "I told you, Goncha, it is over. Will you not embrace me in return? Will you not call me brother as you once did, when we would chase each other through the gardens and our laughter would echo off these very walls?" And Goncha looks down. Her voice drops to something barely above a whisper. She says, "I knocked on that door many times, but I was always turned away, always rejected. And now I find that I cannot trust so easily. The wounds you left are not the kind that heal with a single embrace." Mahmud's eyes glisten. He steps closer and says, "Then tell me what I must do. What penance must I offer? What road must I walk to reach you again? You are the only one I have left, Goncha, my only sister, the only blood that still flows beside mine. Tell me, and I will do it." And then Aladdin, who has been watching this exchange with the quiet patience of a man who has learned that some battles are fought not with swords but with silence, speaks at last. He says that trust must be earned, Mahmud Saab, and it will be earned only when you come before your father as you once did, without deceit, without schemes, as a guest in his home and a son at his table. Come with honesty upon your lips and loyalty in your heart, and inshallah the bridges you burned will be rebuilt. Is that not so, my Goncha? And Goncha, after a long breath, nods her head slowly. Yes, yes, that is so. And then Mahmud asks, his voice trembling now with a tenderness that surprises even himself, "May I look upon the child? May I kiss his eyes? May I breathe in the scent of his skin?" And Goncha walks to the cradle, a simple wooden cradle draped in blue cloth embroidered with silver thread, and she reaches inside and lifts her son, her little Kizza, and she carries him to Mahmud, and she places the child in his arms. Mahmud holds his nephew as though holding something made of light, something so precious that even the act of breathing might shatter it. He looks down at the small face, the closed fists, the tiny mouth that purses in sleep, and he whispers, "My brave one, my lion." He looks exactly like a German chieftain, born to command, born to conquer, and he presses his lips to the child's forehead, and in that kiss there lives a promise, a silent oath between uncle and nephew, between the past and the future. But while this scene of reconciliation unfolds within the warmth of firelight and family, elsewhere in the palace, another story is being written, a story painted in tears. A sporcher, Khartan, enters her chamber alone. She closes the door behind her and leans against it, and the weight of her solitude crashes upon her like a wave upon stone. She is overwhelmed. Grief pours from her in waves that make her body tremble, and she walks to the bed and sits upon its edge, and the tears fall freely, cutting silver paths down her cheeks. She whispers to herself, to the empty room, to the God she hopes is listening. "Where am I going wrong? What have I done that is so unforgivable? I have tried. I have tried with everything I have to become part of this family, to earn their acceptance, to prove that I am more than a stranger in borrowed clothes. But every step I take forward is met with 2 steps of resistance. Every hand I extend is left hanging in the air." And then the door opens. She does not look up immediately. She believes it is Eraz, and in her desperation she continues speaking, her words tumbling out like water from a cracked vessel. "Eraz," she says, "where am I failing? I take steps to become part of this household. I try to understand their ways, to honor their traditions, to carry myself with the dignity they expect. But they do not see me. They do not understand me. My father is gone. He left this world and took with him the only person who ever looked at me without judgment. I am so alone. I am drowning in this palace of stone and silence, and no one reaches down to pull me from the water. I cannot become part of this family. I am so tired, so very tired." And then she turns, and it is not Eraz standing in the doorway. It is Sultan Orhan Saab. He stands there in his riding clothes, his shoulders broad, his presence filling the room the way firelight fills a dark hall, and a sporcher's breath catches in her throat. She begins to rise, startled, embarrassed, but the Sultan raises his hand gently, a gesture that says, "Stay, be still. There is no need for ceremony between us in this moment." And he walks to the bed and sits beside her, close enough that she can feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that the scent of horse and leather and open air reaches her. She asks, her voice small now, "What are you doing here?" And the Sultan looks at her, not with the distant gaze of a ruler assessing a subject, but with the intimate gaze of a man who sees a soul in pain. He asks, "Are you well?" And she shakes her head, and the tears come again, and she whispers, "No, I am not well. I am so alone." The Sultan's jaw tightens. His voice, when it comes, is low and steady and warm. He says, "You are not alone. I am here." And those three words hang in the air between them like a lantern in the dark. And a sporcher looks at him, truly looks at him. And for the first time in a very long time, something inside her unclenches. Something held tight for too many years loosens just enough to let a sliver of hope pass through. And then the Sultan's gaze falls to her hands, and he notices the henna. Deep crimson patterns painted across her palms and fingers, intricate as the branches of a winter tree. He says, "You have applied henna to your hands. Do you know what it means?" And a sporcher looks down at her own hands as though seeing them for the first time, and she says, "Yes, I have learned, but I wish I had never applied it. It has brought me nothing but trouble." She pauses. She swallows. Then she asks, "Is there no solution to this, Orhan? Is there no end to the fighting, the loneliness, the feeling of being an outsider in a world I chose willingly? Will I always live like this? Struggling, wrestling with shadows, knocking on doors that never open?" The Sultan says, "Are you certain that no one cares for you? Think again, a sporcher. Think carefully." And she begins to list them, counting on her hennaed fingers. Malhun Khartan, Fatima, Eras. Yes, perhaps they care, but out of obligation, out of duty, perhaps out of pity. The Sultan listens. Then he asks, "Is there no one else? Is there no one else in your mind who holds you dear?" And a sporcher frowns. She says, "Who else is there?" And the Sultan looks directly into her eyes, and his voice drops to something barely above a whisper, something raw and unguarded, and he says, "I am here. Is my caring not enough?" And the words strike a sporcher like a thunderbolt. She looks at him, truly looks at him, and in his eyes she sees something she has been searching for, something she feared she would never find in these cold palace halls. Sincerity, warmth, the unmistakable fire of a man who means what he says, and neither of them speaks. The silence between them is not empty, it is full, it is alive. It breathes and it pulses, and it holds within itself 1,000 unspoken confessions. But outside, beyond the quiet sanctuary of that chamber, the world does not pause for matters of the heart. Out in the courtyard of Bursa, chaos erupts like a sudden storm. A woman, a Roman woman, has climbed to the upper ledge of the high wall, and she holds a child in her arms, a little girl, no more than 3 years old, and she stands on the edge, and the wind catches her hair and her torn clothes, and she screams down to the gathered crowd below, "If Malhun Khartan does not come to me, I will throw myself from this wall and take my daughter with me." The crowd below surges with panic. Voices rise like birds startled from a tree. People call up to her. "Do not do this, Khartan. If you have no mercy on yourself, think of your child. Think of the innocent soul in your arms." Tamia Boga pushes through the crowd and shouts up to her, "What are you saying, sister? Soldiers, bring this woman down. Now." But as the soldiers step forward, the woman screams again, her voice cracking with desperation. "Stay back. Stay back. If Malhun Khartan does not come, I will jump. I will do it. Do not test me." And Tamia Boga freezes because he can see in her eyes the terrible certainty of someone who has nothing left to lose. Shamal appears beside him and demands to know who let this woman inside the compound. "What kind of spectacle is this?" he says, and his voice is hard with the frustration of a man who sees order crumbling before his eyes. And then Asma comes running. She sprints across the courtyard, her sandals slapping against the stone, and when she looks up and sees the woman on the ledge, the basket of fruit she carries crashes to the ground, pomegranates and apricots scattering across the cobblestones like dropped jewels. She cries out, "May God forgive us. We removed her from the gate, and she has climbed in through the chimney passage. Come down," she shouts. "Come down from there, woman." But the woman on the ledge only grips her child tighter and calls out, "Malhun Khartan." I need to speak with Malhan Kharton. And Asma, seeing that words will not bring her down, turns and runs inside, shouting as she goes, "Do not let her jump, soldiers. Hold your positions. I am bringing Malhan Kharton." Inside, in the warm glow of the women's quarters, Goncha is speaking to Fatima. Her voice carries the fragile melody of renewed hope. She says, "Mahmud Saab, after all these years, held me tightly for the first time. The way he used to hold me when we were children. Mother, he took my little Kizzer into his arms. He held him and he smiled, and both he and Alordin said that the enmity is finished." And Malhan listens to her daughter's words, and a prayer of gratitude forms upon her lips. She says, 100,000 praises to Allah. But my child, one cannot always tell what lies beneath the surface of such gestures. Keep your guard. Do not let your joy cloud your judgment. Goncha nods and says, "You speak wisely, mother." And then Halima leans forward and says, "Come, sister, let us see whether the color has come." And Eraz raises her hand in warning. "Wait. If the henna has not taken color, it is considered a sign of ill fortune. It must stay on until morning." Halima unwraps the cloth from her hand and looks, and her face falls. "Eraz," she says, "the color has not come. Look, it is pale. It has not darkened. Is there some deficiency in me? Is there some curse upon my hand?" And Goncha leans forward and takes Halima's hand and holds it gently and says, "Do not be afraid, dear one. That superstition speaks of brides. It is not your burden to carry." Fatima nods and says, "We will apply it again. We will make it right. Will we not, sister?" And Goncha agrees, "Yes, let us apply it once more." And it is precisely at this moment of domestic tenderness that Asma bursts through the door, breathless, her face flushed with urgency. "Malhan Kharton," she gasps. "Malhan Kharton, that Roman woman and her daughter have climbed to the ledge above the eastern wall. She is threatening to throw herself and the child. She says she will not come down unless she speaks to you." And Malhan's face hardens. She rises at once. She says, "What is wrong with that woman? Has she lost her mind?" And the entire room empties as they all rush outside, their feet swift upon the cold stone, their hearts hammering with a fear that none of them will name aloud. Outside, the scene is a maelstrom of voices and reaching hands. Soldiers form a ring beneath the ledge, their arms outstretched as though they might catch the woman if she falls. The crowd chants, "Come down, Kharton. For the love of God, come down. Think of your child." And into this chaos ride Abdul Rahman and Turhan, their horses' hooves clattering upon the cobblestones of the Bursa gate. Abdul Rahman hears the noise and reins his horse to a halt and demands to know what is happening. Turhan, ever measured, ever watchful, says, "Inshallah it will be nothing grave," and they dismount and push their way through the crowd. Turhan sees the woman on the ledge and turns to Shamal. "Who is this woman?" he asks. And Shamal shakes his head and says, "We are finding out. But this is no ordinary disturbance." And then Malhan Kharton appears. She steps out from the palace doors and into the courtyard, and the crowd parts before her the way water parts before the prow of a ship. She looks up, and the woman on the ledge sees her, and the woman cries out, her voice raw with desperation, "Malhan Kharton, I need to speak with you. Malhan Kharton." And Malhan calls back, her voice commanding, and yet carrying beneath its strength a current of genuine compassion. "Wait, wait, I am here, I have come. Step back from the edge. Move the child back. Move her back now, quickly." Fatima emerges behind Malhan, and then Nilafar, and then Halima, and then Goncha, and all the women of the household stand in the courtyard, their faces turned upward, their eyes wide with the shared horror of watching a mother and child balanced upon the thin line between life and death. Malhan calls up again. "What do you want, woman? You have brought a small child to this height. Have you no fear of God? Come down. Come down and we will speak. We will resolve whatever burden you carry. But come down first." And the woman on the ledge draws a breath that seems to pull the air from the entire courtyard, and she says, in a voice that rings against the stone walls like a bell, "I have brought my daughter to her father. I have brought her to the man who gave her life, and then abandoned us both." Alordin has now emerged as well, and he stands at the edge of the crowd, his arms folded, his face dark with concern. He calls up to her, "Sister, come down and tell us. Who is your husband? We will find him. We will hold him to account." And the woman looks down at the gathered faces, and her eyes sweep across them all, and she says, "You all know him very well." Halima leans toward Goncha and whispers, "By God, someone's secret child has appeared." Goncha whispers back, "We cannot tell who she means. What is this woman saying?" And Nilafar, standing beside them, her hands clasped tightly before her, says with quiet fury, "What kind of heartless creature abandons his own child? What manner of coward leaves a woman to raise his blood alone?" And it is at this precise moment that Palladios, whom they know also by the name Evanos, comes walking into the courtyard. He has been smiling. There is lightness in his step, the buoyancy of a man approaching his own wedding day, a man who believes that the hardest chapters of his life are behind him and that the pages ahead hold nothing but joy. But as he rounds the corner and sees the crowd, sees the upturned faces, sees the soldiers with outstretched arms, his smile falters. He calls out, "Commanders, what is happening here? What is this commotion? Fatima, what is going on?" And then he turns, he looks up, and he sees her. He sees the woman on the ledge. He sees the child in her arms. And the blood drains from his face. Every drop of color vanishes as though pulled away by an invisible hand. His lips part, his chest heaves, and from his mouth escapes a single word, a name spoken not with authority or composure, but with the helpless terror of a man watching his entire world unravel before his eyes. Thalia. The name falls from his lips like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples spread outward, touching everyone who hears it. Fatima, who stands closest to him, turns her head slowly. She looks at him. She sees the recognition in his face, the guilt, the naked fear. And her voice, when it comes, is a blade forged in the fires of betrayal. She says, "You know this woman. You know her." And Evanos cannot answer. His mouth opens. It closes. No sound emerges. He stands there like a man struck by lightning, frozen in the terrible space between confession and silence. Aladdin says, "Come down, woman. If you will not show mercy to yourself, then show mercy to the child." Malhun calls up once more, tell us who is the father of your child. We will find him. We will bring him before you. Come down now." And the woman on the ledge, her eyes burning with the fire of a mother's love and a woman's wrath, looks directly at the crowd below, and her voice cuts through the evening air like a scimitar through silk. "The man who is to become your son-in-law tomorrow," she says. "Palladios. He is the father of my daughter." Silence. Absolute, crushing, suffocating silence. It descends upon the courtyard like a shroud pulled over the face of the dead. Every mouth falls open. Every eye widens. Every heart stops its beating for one suspended, infinite moment. Did she say Palladios? Did she say it? Is it true? The whispers begin, hissing through the crowd like wind through dry grass, and heads turn, one after another, until every gaze in the courtyard has come to rest upon a single figure. Evanos. Palladios. The man who stands among them, with the expression of a man who has just watched his own grave being dug. And Fatima. God help Fatima. The ground beneath her feet opens up and swallows her whole, and though she does not fall, she might as well have, because in that moment everything she believed, everything she trusted, every plan and every hope and every whispered promise exchanged in the quiet hours of the night, all of it turns to ash. She looks at Evanos. She looks at this man she was to marry. And her eyes, those beautiful, proud, unwavering eyes, fill with a devastation so complete that the soldiers closest to her look away, unable to bear witness to the breaking of so noble a spirit. She speaks, her voice shakes but does not break. She says, "You told me there was no one. You swore to me that your past held no ties, no bonds, no obligations. You looked into my eyes and you lied. Again. You lied to me again." And Evanos takes a step toward her and says, "No, Fatima, listen to me," but she is already turning away, and her back becomes a wall that no words can breach. He calls after her, "Fatima, Fatima." And he moves to follow, but Aladdin steps into his path, his hand raised, his eyes dark with the controlled fury of a father whose daughter has been humiliated before the entire world. "You stay," he says. "You stay right where you are. And you answer me, Evanos Saab. What is that woman saying? What truth have you buried beneath the floor of your smiles and your promises?" But Evanos has no answers. He stands there, stripped bare before the eyes of warriors and women and servants and soldiers. A man whose carefully constructed world has been torn apart by a single name spoken from a ledge. And Fatima walks through the corridors of the palace with the fury of a storm and the silence of the grave. She does not weep, not yet. The tears will come later in the dark when no one is watching. But now she is made of iron and fire. She steps into the stable yard and seizes the reins of her horse and swings into the saddle with the practiced grace of a woman raised among warriors. And she kicks the flanks of her mount, and the horse leaps forward, and Fatima rides out through the palace gates, out into the falling dusk, her hair streaming behind her, her jaw set, her eyes fixed upon the horizon, because she cannot stay here, she cannot breathe here, she cannot exist in a place where the air itself is poisoned by betrayal. And hidden in the shadows beside the outer wall, two figures watch her go, Difner and Yakid. They crouch behind a broken cart, their faces half concealed by hoods, and Difner's mouth curves into a smile so wide and so wicked that it seems to belong to something other than human. She turns to Yakid and says, "Did I not tell you? Did I not promise you that they would walk into our trap of their own accord? We did not need to push them. We did not need to chase them. We only needed to plant the seed and let their own trust water it." Yakid's eyes burn with something darker than satisfaction. He says, "Wherever they go, wherever they hide, our wrath will find them. They made us suffer. They took from us what was ours. And I swear upon every drop of blood that was spilled, I will return to them double the pain they gave to me." And then both of them rise and vanish into the falling darkness like smoke caught by the wind, and their laughter hangs in the air behind them, thin and cold and terrible. Back inside the palace, in the chamber where lamplight dances upon the walls, a sporcher carton sits with Sultan Orhan Saab, and the world outside might be burning. But in this room there is only the quiet sound of breathing and the soft crackle of the fire. A sporcher says, "But how can I stay here, Orhan? Perhaps Nilafar is right. Perhaps I should leave. Perhaps my presence does nothing but stir conflict and invite misery. Perhaps I am the stone in the river that disrupts the current, and if I were removed, the water would flow smooth and clear." And the Sultan says one word, "Do not go." And those 3 syllables carry more weight than 1,000 speeches. A sporcher turns to look at him, and the lamplight catches the moisture in her eyes, and for a moment neither of them speaks. Then the Sultan continues, and his voice is measured but warm like sunlight filtered through autumn leaves. He says, "You need purpose, a sporcher. That is what will anchor you here, not my words, not the acceptance of others, but the work of your own hands. The vakf, the endowment you will manage, it is not merely an administrative task. Through it, you will serve both the Roman and the Turkic people of this land. You will be their guardian. You will stand between them and hardship. And you saw today how the common people received you. They cheered for you. They called your name. They recognize your good intentions even when those within these walls do not." A sporcher shakes her head slowly, the weight of doubt still pressing upon her. She says, "But your family, Orhan, your family does not see me the way the common people do." And the Sultan reaches forward, and his hand comes to rest beside hers upon the bed, close but not quite touching, a gesture that holds within it both restraint and promise. He says, "You are my family too, a sporcher, and everyone in time will come to accept this. Give them time. Give yourself time. The roots of a strong tree do not grow in a single season." A sporcher looks down. She says, "Nilafar, she is a woman who loves deeply." The Sultan nods slowly. He says, "She will come around too, a sporcher." A sporcher's voice drops. She says, "Nilafar does not wish to share the person she loves. She guards her place beside you with the ferocity of a lioness guarding her cubs." And the Sultan says her name softly. A sporcher, just her name, nothing more. And the way he says it carries within it everything that words cannot express. And a sporcher looks up, and her eyes meet his, and she says, "And I, how will I share you? How do you ask a heart to divide itself? How do you ask fire to burn in 2 hearths at once without diminishing in either?" The Sultan falls silent. The question hangs between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable, and in the silence a sporcher reaches across the bed and picks up the sword that lies there, the gleaming blade with its leather-wrapped hilt, and she holds it out to him. She says, "This will be very difficult for me, more difficult than any battle I have ever fought, because battles end. They end in victory or defeat. But this has no ending. This will go on for as long as we draw breath. The Sultan takes the sword from her hands. He holds it for a moment, feeling its weight, the cool solidity of steel, the certainty of metal, and then he sets it aside, carefully, reverently, as though laying down not just a weapon but an old way of understanding the world. And then a sporcher extends her hand, not to offer the sword, not to gesture, simply to reach. And the Sultan takes her hand in his, and their fingers interlock, and the henna upon her skin presses against the calluses of his palm, and they look at each other, and in that look there is everything. There is the uncertainty of tomorrow and the tenderness of tonight. There is the knowledge that the world outside this room is crumbling, and the fragile faith that perhaps, together, they might build something strong enough to withstand the storm. But do not be deceived by the gentleness of this moment, for in the darkness beyond the palace walls, forces are gathering. Yakid has not spoken empty words. His hatred is not the fleeting anger of a man wronged once. It is the deep, patient, poisonous hatred of a man who has had everything taken from him and who has spent every waking moment since then sharpening the blade of his vengeance. He moves through the night like a wolf through tall grass, and beside him Difner walks with the confidence of a woman who has learned that the greatest weapon in any war is not the sword but the secret. They planted their trap, and they watched it spring shut, and Fatima rode out of the palace gates straight into the darkness they had prepared for her. And Turhan, that lion among men, that blade of the faithful, stands in the courtyard of Bursa with his hand upon the pommel of his sword, and his eyes narrowed against the falling dark, and he feels in his bones what he cannot yet name. Something is wrong. Something is moving beneath the surface of events like a serpent beneath still water. He turns to Abdul Rahman and says, "We must find Fatima Khatun. She rode out alone, and the night is not safe." Abdul Rahman nods, and both men move toward the stables with the urgency of soldiers who know that hesitation is the mother of defeat. Inside the palace, the woman on the ledge has been brought down. Soldiers helped her descend, their hands gentle upon her arms, and she stands now in the courtyard with her daughter pressed against her chest, both of them trembling, and around them the murmur of 100 voices rises and falls like the tide. Malhan Khatun approaches her and says, "Tell me everything. Tell me the truth, all of it, and hold nothing back." And the woman begins to speak, and her story pours out of her like blood from an open wound, and every word she speaks drives another nail into the coffin of the marriage that was to be, the alliance that was to strengthen the house of Orhan, the union that was to bring together two worlds. And Evanos stands apart from the crowd, alone, the way a man stands at the edge of a cliff, and he watches the life he had imagined crumble to dust, and there is nothing he can do, nothing he can say, because the truth has spoken louder than any lie he might construct, and the truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. And within the women's quarters, Halima looks at her hand. She looks at the henna that refuses to darken. She knows it is superstition. She knows it is an old wives' tale passed down through generations of women who read meaning into the color of crushed leaves upon skin. But she cannot shake the chill that settles in her heart, because tonight the henna has not taken, and tonight the world has shifted on its axis, and tonight the promises that were made in daylight have been broken by the truths that emerge only in the dark. Fatima rides through the forest. The trees close around her like the walls of a corridor, and the moon casts silver light upon the path, and her horse's breath comes in great white plumes in the cold air, and she rides without direction, without destination, driven only by the need to move, to outrun the humiliation and the heartbreak and the terrible crushing weight of having been made a fool before everyone she loves. She trusted him. She trusted Evanos. She looked into his eyes, and she believed what she saw there. And now she knows that what she saw was nothing more than a reflection of her own hope, her own longing, her own desperate need to believe that someone could love her without condition, without hidden purpose, without a past that lurked in the shadows waiting to emerge. And behind her, somewhere in the darkness, Yakid and Difner follow, not closely. They do not need to. They know where she is going because they are the ones who set the course. Every event of this evening was arranged. Every revelation was timed. The woman on the ledge did not climb there by chance. She was sent. She was armed with the truth, yes, but the decision to weaponize that truth, to unleash it at the moment of maximum devastation, that was the work of Yakid and Difne, and they move now through the forest with the quiet satisfaction of hunters who have driven their prey exactly where they wished. And in the palace, Sultan Urhin Sab still sits beside a sporcher. But now he has risen from the bed, and he walks to the window, and he looks out at the courtyard below, and he sees the aftermath of chaos, the soldiers, the weeping woman, the huddle of whispering servants, and his jaw tightens. He knows. He does not yet know the details, but he knows, in the way that a seasoned warrior knows the scent of approaching battle, that tonight has changed the course of many lives, and that the morning will bring decisions that cannot be postponed. He turns to a sporcher and says, "Rest now. Tomorrow will be a long day." And then he walks to the door and he pauses, and without looking back he says, "You ask me if my caring is enough." And he opens the door, and in the threshold between the lamplight and the dark corridor beyond, he says, "It will have to be, for both of us." And he is gone. And a sporcher sits alone in the room, and the sword lies on the table where he placed it, and the henna upon her hand has deepened to the color of old wine, and outside the wind has risen, carrying upon it the scent of smoke and cedar and the distant rumble of hooves upon hard earth. And the night deepens. The torches along the walls of Bursa gutter and flare in the wind. The guards on the walls tighten their cloaks and peer into the darkness beyond the city limits, and somewhere in that darkness a woman rides alone, and somewhere in that darkness predators follow her, and somewhere in that darkness the seeds of the next battle are already taking root in poisoned soil. Because the war is never over, it changes shape, it changes name. It moves from the battlefield to the bedchamber, from the throne room to the courtyard, from the clash of swords to the whisper of secrets. But it never ends, it never rests. And those who believe they have found peace are merely standing in the eye of the storm, surrounded on all sides by winds that have not yet reached them but are coming, always coming, inevitable as the dawn, merciless as the desert sun. Tarhin rides out through the gates of Bursa with Abdul Rahman at his side, and behind them ride 12 of their finest soldiers, armed and armored and grim-faced in the moonlight. They follow the trail of Fatima's horse through the forest, the hoofprints pressed into soft earth, and Tarhin leans forward in his saddle and reads the ground the way a scholar reads a manuscript, and he says, "She rides fast. Too fast. She is not thinking." And Abdul Rahman replies, "A heart in pain does not think. It only runs." And they ride on, deeper into the forest, deeper into the night, deeper into the web that Yakid and Difner have woven with patience and malice, and the dark art of knowing exactly which threads to pull to unravel the tapestry of a family, an alliance, a kingdom. And Damir Khan, back in the palace, has taken charge of the woman and her child. He has ordered food brought to them, water, warm blankets. He has stationed guards at the door, not to imprison them but to protect them, because he senses, as Tarhin sensed, that this woman's arrival was not accidental, that she is a piece on a board controlled by hands they have not yet identified. He sits across from her and asks, gently but firmly, who sent you? Who told you to come tonight? Who gave you access to the compound? And the woman looks at him with haunted eyes and says nothing, because the answer to that question leads to a place she is terrified to go. And Malhan Khartan stands in the corridor outside her chamber, and Goncha stands beside her, and neither of them speaks. They do not need to. They have shared too many battles, too many betrayals, too many midnight vigils to require words at moments like these. Malhan reaches out and takes her daughter's hand, and Goncha squeezes it, and in that simple gesture there lives the entire history of a mother and daughter who have weathered storms that would have destroyed lesser souls. And Alauddin has retreated to his chamber, and he sits at his desk, and before him lies a parchment upon which he has begun to write, but the ink has dried upon the nib of his reed because his mind is elsewhere. He is thinking about Evanos. He is thinking about the man he welcomed into his family, the man to whom he was about to give his daughter, the man who stood in his hall and swore upon the honor of his blood that he was worthy of the trust being placed in him. And Alauddin's hands, those hands that have wielded swords and signed treaties and held newborn children, curl into fists upon the surface of the desk. And Mahmud, who earlier held his sister in his arms and spoke of peace and new beginnings, stands at the window of his chamber and looks out at the chaos below. And upon his face there plays a smile so thin and so knowing that if anyone were to see it, they would understand instantly that Mahmud's reconciliation with Goncha was not born of love alone, but of calculation, of the careful, measured chess game he has played since the day he decided that the only way to survive in the house of Orhan is to become indispensable. And so the threads multiply. They weave and cross and tangle, betrayal laid upon betrayal, trust placed in hands that were never worthy of it, love offered to hearts that held within them chambers locked and hidden. And over it all, the great shadow of Yakid falls like the wing of a vulture, circling, circling, patient, relentless, waiting for the moment when the last pillar cracks and the whole magnificent structure comes crashing down. But the house of Orhan Sab has stood against greater storms than this. It was built not on stone alone, but on faith, on the unshakable conviction that truth, though it may be buried, will always claw its way to the surface. And Tarhan rides through the night to find Fatima, and his sword hangs ready at his side, and his heart beats with the steady rhythm of a man who has pledged his life to the protection of those he loves. And Abdul Rahman rides beside him, and behind them the soldiers follow, and the forest opens before them like a mouth, and they ride into it without hesitation, without fear, because fear is a luxury they have never been able to afford. And the story is not over. It is far from over. The night has not yet reached its darkest hour. The revelations that have shaken the palace of Bursa are only the beginning, the first tremors of an earthquake whose full force has not yet been felt. Yakid moves in the darkness. Difne weaves her web. Mahmud plays his quiet game. And at the center of it all, Sultan Orhan Sab walks the corridors of his palace alone, his shadow long upon the floor, his mind turning over the pieces of a puzzle that grows more complex with every passing hour. And he knows, with the certainty of a man who has carried the weight of a nation upon his shoulders for more years than he cares to count, that the morning will bring not resolution, but escalation. Not peace, but the terrible clarity that comes only when all masks have been removed, and every soul stands naked before the judgment of God. And the henna upon Halima's hand still has not darkened. And Fatima's horse still gallops through the forest, its hooves drumming against the earth like the beating of a desperate heart. And Asportia still sits upon the edge of the bed, her hand outstretched, her palm open, as though she can still feel the warmth of the Sultan's fingers intertwined with her own. And the fire in the hearth burns low, and the wind carries the sound of distant hoofbeats. And somewhere in the darkness, a voice whispers, "This is only the beginning." The war is not over. It has merely changed its face. And when the sun rises over Bursa, it will illuminate not a city at peace, but a city on the edge of a blade, balanced between the past and the future, between loyalty and betrayal, between the love that builds empires and the hatred that brings them to their knees. And that sunrise is coming. It is always coming. Peace be upon you, dear viewers. The night has deepened over Bursa, and the moon hangs like a silver coin suspended in the endless dark. And beneath its cold light, the palace stands in uneasy stillness, its walls holding within them the echoes of the evening's revelations, the shattered trust, the exposed secrets, the hearts that have been broken and the hearts that have been hardened by what they witnessed. The torches along the corridors flicker and sputter in the draughts that creep through the ancient stone, and in every chamber, in every hall, in every shadowed alcove, there lives now a tension so thick that it can be felt upon the skin like the pressure before a storm. Tarhin rides through the forest with Abdul Rahman at his side, and behind them the 12 soldiers follow in grim formation, their horses' hooves muffled by the carpet of fallen leaves that covers the forest floor. The trees rise around them like silent sentinels, their branches reaching toward the sky like the arms of men frozen in prayer, and the moonlight filters through the canopy in broken shafts that illuminate the path in patches of silver and shadow. Tarhin's eyes never rest. They sweep the darkness ahead, searching for any sign of Fatima's passage, any indication of the direction she has taken in her flight from the palace. He leans forward in his saddle, and studies the ground. And even in the dim light, his trained gaze catches the impression of hoofprints pressed into the soft earth, the broken twigs that mark the passage of a horse moving at speed, the disturbance in the underbrush that tells the story of a woman riding without care for her own safety. Abdul Rahman draws his horse alongside Turhan's and says she has been riding for more than an hour now. If she continues at this pace, her horse will founder before dawn. Turhan nods, but does not slow his own mount. He says, then we must reach her before that happens. The forest is not safe at night, and there are those who would see harm come to the house of Orhan. His voice carries the weight of knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of a man who has spent his life reading the movements of enemies both visible and hidden. And Abdul Rahman hears in that voice the same suspicion that has been growing in his own mind since they rode out through the gates. They ride on. The forest grows denser. The path narrows until it is barely wide enough for two horses to pass abreast, and the soldiers behind them fall into single file, their hands resting upon the hilts of their swords, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of ambush. And Turhan thinks of Fatima. He thinks of the proud young woman who has been raised among warriors, who carries herself with the dignity of her bloodline, who has never shown fear in the face of any enemy. He thinks of how she looked when she rode out through the palace gates, her hair streaming behind her, her face set in an expression that was not fear but something worse, something that spoke of a wound so deep that it could not be shown, could only be carried in silence until the bearer finds a place far enough from watching eyes to finally let the weight of it crush her. And somewhere ahead of them, Fatima has indeed stopped. Her horse stands in a small clearing, its sides heaving, foam flecking its mouth, its head hanging low with exhaustion. Fatima has dismounted, and she stands at the edge of the clearing, her back to the horse, her face turned toward the darkness of the forest beyond. She does not weep. The tears have not come yet. They are lodged somewhere in her chest, a pressure building behind her ribs, a flood held back by a dam of pride and fury, and the absolute refusal to let herself break. She stares into the darkness, and she sees nothing, because what she is looking at is not the forest, but the memory of Evanos's face, the way his expression changed when he saw the woman on the ledge, the way her name fell from his lips like a confession torn from his throat against his will. Thalia. That single word that rewrote everything she thought she knew about the man she was to marry. She thinks of all the times he looked into her eyes, all the times he spoke of the future they would build together, all the times he held her hand and swore that there was nothing in his past that she needed to fear. And she realizes now that every one of those moments was built upon a foundation of lies, that the man she loved was a construction, an edifice erected to conceal the truth of who he really was, and that the real Evanos, the one who abandoned a woman and child, the one who walked away from his own blood and built a new life upon the grave of his discarded obligations, that man had been hiding behind the mask all along, watching her fall in love with a fiction. And then she hears it, a sound in the darkness, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves disturbed by something larger than the wind. She turns, her hand moving instinctively to the dagger at her belt, her body tensing into the posture of a woman raised among fighters, and she peers into the shadows between the trees. A figure emerges, and then another, and then more, stepping out from behind the ancient oaks like spirits materializing from the darkness itself. And at the head of them stands Yakid. His face is illuminated by the moonlight, and upon that face there lives an expression of such pure, undiluted satisfaction that Fatima feels her blood turn to ice in her veins. He says, "Fatima Khatun, how fortunate that we should meet here, in this lonely place, far from the walls of Bursa and the swords of your protectors." Fatima's hand tightens upon the hilt of her dagger. She does not draw it, not yet. She knows that she is outnumbered, that the shadows behind Yakid hold at least a dozen armed men, that any move she makes will be met with overwhelming force. But she also knows that she is the daughter of a Lordin, the granddaughter of warriors whose names are written in the chronicles of conquest, and she will not show fear to this man who has crawled out of the darkness like a serpent seeking warmth. She says, "Yakid, I should have known. Every time misfortune falls upon our house, your shadow can be found lurking nearby." Yakid laughs. It is not a pleasant sound. It carries within it the memory of every humiliation he has suffered, every defeat he has endured, every moment of powerlessness that has fueled the fire of his vengeance. He says, misfortune. No, Khartan. What fell upon your house tonight was not misfortune. It was truth. The truth that your beloved ever knows, buried beneath years of smiles and oaths. I merely helped it find its way to the surface. Fatima's eyes narrow. She says, you sent that woman. You arranged this entire spectacle. Yakid spreads his hands in a gesture of mock humility. He says, I am merely a humble servant of justice, Khartan. The woman came of her own will. Her grievance is real. Her suffering is genuine. I simply provided her with the opportunity to be heard. Is that not what your house claims to stand for? Justice for the wronged, a voice for the voiceless. And Ifne steps out from behind him, her smile as sharp as a blade. She says, you should thank us, Fatima Khartan. We saved you from a marriage built on lies. We showed you the true face of the man who would have stood beside you before God and made vows he had no intention of keeping. You should be grateful. Fatima looks at her, and in her eyes there burns a fire that would make lesser souls step back. She says, I will remember your kindness, Difne. I will remember it when the time comes to repay it. Difne's smile does not falter. She says, threats are the refuge of the powerless, Khartan. And right now, standing alone in this forest, surrounded by my men, you have never been more powerless in your life. And Yakid steps closer. His hand moves to the sword at his side, and he draws the blade slowly, deliberately, letting the moonlight catch the steel so that it gleams like a sliver of captured starlight. He says, your family has taken everything from me. My position, my honor, my future. They cast me out like a dog and expected me to crawl away and die in some forgotten corner of the world. But I did not die, Khartan. I survived. I grew strong. And I swore an oath upon the grave of my ancestors that I would return, and that when I returned, I would make them pay for every indignity, every slight, every moment of suffering they inflicted upon me. He raises the sword. The blade points toward Fatima's heart. He says, and now, the payment begins. But Fatima does not flinch. She stands tall, her chin raised, her shoulders square, and she says, do what you will, Yakid. But know this, my death will not bring you what you seek. It will only bring down upon your head a wrath so terrible that even the mountains will tremble. My father will hunt you to the ends of the earth. My brothers will tear apart every hiding place you find. And Turhan Saab, that lion of the faith, that blade of the righteous, he will find you. And when he does, he will make you wish you had never been born. And Yakid hesitates, for just a moment, for the space of a single heartbeat, because he knows that she speaks the truth. He knows that the death of Fatima will unleash a storm that even he may not be able to weather. But the hatred in his heart is stronger than his fear, and he raises the blade higher, and his muscles tense for the strike. And then a voice cuts through the darkness, a voice like thunder rolling across the mountains, a voice that carries within it the absolute authority of a man who has never known retreat. The voice says, Yakid. And Yakid freezes, his head turns, his eyes widen. And there, emerging from the trees on the far side of the clearing, rides Turhan. His sword is already drawn. His horse's hooves strike sparks from the stones beneath the leaves. And behind him ride Abdul Rahman and the 12 soldiers, spreading out in a formation that cuts off every avenue of escape. Turhan brings his horse to a halt at the edge of the clearing. His eyes lock upon Yakid with the intensity of a hawk fixed upon its prey. He says, you dare. You dare to raise a blade against a daughter of this house. You dare to threaten one who is under my protection. Yakid's men shift uneasily. They look at each other. They look at the mounted soldiers who outnumber them. They look at Turhan, and they see in his eyes the promise of death, swift and certain and utterly without mercy. Yakid lowers his sword. He takes a step back. He says, Turhan Saab, how unexpected. I was merely having a conversation with the Khartan, a friendly exchange of views. Turhan dismounts in a single fluid motion. He walks toward Yakid, and with each step the distance between them shrinks, and with each step the air grows heavier with the weight of impending violence. He says, a conversation, with drawn steel. in the darkness of the forest. You must think me a fool, Yakid. And Yakid's mask slips. The smooth pretense of civility falls away, and beneath it is revealed the face of a man consumed by hatred, twisted by bitterness, hollowed out by the long years of nursing his grievances. He says, I think you are a man who serves a house that will soon fall. The foundations are cracking, Tarhan. Did you not see what happened tonight? The secrets are emerging. The lies are unraveling. And when the final truth comes to light, when the house of Orhan is exposed for what it truly is, you will find yourself standing alone in the rubble, wondering how you could have been so blind. Tarhan's expression does not change. He says, the only thing I see is a traitor who has forgotten his place. And the only truth that matters tonight is this. You will release Fatima Khan into my custody, and you will withdraw your men, and you will pray that the Sultan in his mercy chooses to spare your miserable life. And Yakid laughs, but there is no humor in the sound. There is only the bitterness of a man who knows he has been outmaneuvered, who knows that this battle is lost, but who also knows that the war is far from over. He sheathes his sword. He takes another step back. He says, take her, Tarhan. Take her back to her shattered wedding and her lying bridegroom and her family of hypocrites. But remember this night. Remember that I was close enough to end her. And know that next time, you may not arrive in time. And then he turns. He gestures to his men, and they melt back into the darkness, disappearing among the trees like shadows fleeing the dawn. Tarhan watches them go. He does not pursue. He knows that the forest is Yakid's territory, that pursuit would only lead his men into ambush, that the wiser course is to secure Fatima and return to Bursa with all speed. But his eyes follow Yakid's retreating figure until it vanishes completely, and in those eyes there burns a promise, a silent oath that this account will be settled, that this debt will be paid, that the next time they meet there will be no conversation, only steel and blood and the final judgment of the righteous. He turns to Fatima. She stands where she stood before, her hand still upon the hilt of her dagger, her face pale in the moonlight but her posture unbowed. He says, Khartan, are you harmed? She shakes her head. She says no, but I would have been if you had arrived a moment later. Tarhan nods. He says, then let us return. Your family waits, and there is much that must be discussed before the sun rises. And Fatima walks to her horse. She mounts. She looks once more into the darkness where Yakid vanished, and upon her face there appears an expression that is not fear, not gratitude, but something harder, something forged in the fire of this night's betrayals. She says, he said the foundations are cracking. He said the lies are unraveling. Tarhan mounts his own horse. He brings it alongside hers. He says, Yakid speaks poison because poison is all he knows. But the foundations of this house are built upon faith, Khartan, and faith does not crack. It does not crumble. It endures. Fatima says nothing. She turns her horse toward Bursa, and she begins to ride. And behind her, Tarhan and Abdul Rahman and the soldiers fall into formation, and they ride through the forest in silence, and the moon watches them from above, and the trees stand witness to their passage, and somewhere in the darkness Yakid watches too, nursing his hatred, planning his next move, waiting for the moment when the walls will be unguarded and the blades will be unsheathed and the final reckoning will begin. Back in the palace, the night has not been idle. In the chamber where Damia Khan sits with the Roman woman and her child, questions have been asked and answers have been given, and the picture that emerges is one of careful orchestration, of a conspiracy that reaches far beyond the simple revelation of Evanos's past. The woman, whose name is Thalia, speaks haltingly at first, her voice trembling with the exhaustion of one who has carried her burden alone for too many years. But as Damia Khan listens, as he asks his gentle but probing questions, the full scope of the deception begins to take shape. She tells him that she met Evanos years ago in a village near the Byzantine border. She tells him that he was charming, attentive, full of promises about the life they would build together. She tells him that she believed him, that she gave herself to him, that she bore his child believing that he would return to claim them both. But he never returned. He vanished into the chaos of the borderlands, and she was left alone, a woman abandoned, a mother without support, struggling to survive in a world that had no place for her. And then, she says, a woman came to her, a woman with dark eyes and a smile that promised relief from suffering. The woman said her name was Difne, and she said that she knew where Evanos was, that she could take Thalia to him, that she could help her claim what was rightfully hers. And Thalia, desperate and alone, agreed. She followed Difne. She came to Bursa. She climbed to the ledge, because Difne told her it was the only way to be heard, the only way to ensure that the powerful family who had welcomed Evanos into their midst would learn the truth. Damir Khan listens to all of this, and his face grows darker with each revelation. He says, "You were used, Thalia. You were a weapon in the hands of those who wish harm upon this house. Your grievance is real, but your arrival tonight, the manner of it, the timing, all of it was designed to inflict maximum damage upon the family of Sultan Orhan." Thalia's eyes fill with tears. She says, "I did not know. I only wanted my daughter to know her father. I only wanted what was promised to me." And Damir Khan, despite the anger that burns in his chest, feels a flicker of compassion for this woman who has been manipulated so thoroughly. He says, "You will be cared for. You and your child will be given food and shelter and protection. But you must tell me everything you know about Difne. Everything," she said. "Every place she took you. Every person you saw in her company." And Thalia begins to speak, and the web grows more complex. And the names that emerge from her account are names that Damir Khan recognizes, names that send a chill down his spine, names that connect the events of this night to currents of conspiracy that run far deeper than anyone had suspected. In another part of the palace, Malhan Khartan sits with a Lordin. The chamber is quiet save for the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of guards packing the corridors. Aladdin's face is carved from stone, his eyes fixed upon some point beyond the walls, his mind working through the implications of what has transpired. He says, "Evanos must answer for this. There can be no wedding. There can be no alliance built upon deception." Malhan nods. She says, "Fatima's heart is broken. She rode out into the night without escort, without protection. Turhan has gone after her." Aladdin says, "Turhan will bring her back. He always does." And then he falls silent. And in that silence there lives the weight of a father's failure, the terrible knowledge that he invited this man into his home, that he offered his daughter to someone unworthy, that his judgment, upon which so many lives depend, proved flawed in a matter of the gravest consequence. Malhan reaches out and places her hand upon his arm. She says, "You could not have known. Evanos hid his past with the skill of a man practiced in deception. The fault lies with him, not with you." But Aladdin shakes his head. He says, "A leader must see what others cannot. A leader must know the hearts of those he admits to his council. I failed in this, Malhan, and my daughter paid the price." And Malhan says nothing, because there is nothing to say. She only tightens her grip upon his arm, and they sit together in the firelight, two souls bound by years of shared struggle, and they wait for word of their daughter, and they prepare themselves for the battles that the morning will bring. And in the chamber of Sultan Orhan, the Sultan himself stands at the window, looking out at the courtyard below. The chaos has subsided. The soldiers have returned to their posts. The servants have retreated to their quarters. The palace has achieved a semblance of calm, but the Sultan knows that the calm is illusory, that beneath the surface the waters are churning with forces that will not be stilled until they have run their course. He thinks of Asportia. He thinks of the conversation they shared, the questions she asked, the way her hand felt in his. He thinks of Nilafar, his wife, who even now lies awake in her own chamber, her mind tormented by the same thoughts that torment his. He thinks of the impossible balance he must maintain, the competing loyalties, the conflicting demands, the narrow path he must walk between the claims of love and the requirements of duty. And he thinks of the enemies who circle in the darkness, waiting for any sign of weakness, any crack in the armor of his house. Yakid, Difne, others whose names he does not yet know, but whose presence he can feel like a cold wind upon the back of his neck. He turns from the window. He walks to the table where his sword lies. He picks it up, feels the familiar weight of it, the perfect balance of the blade. And he says to the empty room, to the listening night, I will not let them break what we have built. I will not let them tear apart the bonds that hold this family together. Whatever comes, whatever price must be paid, I will pay it. But they will not win, not while I draw breath. And outside, the night continues its slow march toward dawn. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. The wind carries the scent of pine and wood smoke and the distant promise of rain. And somewhere in the forest, riding hard for Bursa, Tarhin and Fatima, and the soldiers push their horses through the darkness, racing against time, racing against fate, racing against the knowledge that the events of this night have set in motion a chain of consequences that no one can fully predict. And the war continues. It has always continued. It will always continue, because the war is not simply a clash of armies or a contest of rulers. It is the eternal struggle between truth and falsehood, between honor and betrayal, between the light that seeks to build and the darkness that seeks only to destroy. And every generation must fight it anew, must choose which side they will stand upon, must face the consequences of their choices. And the House of Orhan has made its choice. It stands for truth. It stands for justice. It stands for the protection of the innocent and the punishment of the guilty. And though the enemies gather and the shadows deepen and the lies multiply like weeds in an untended garden, the house will stand, because it is built not upon stone alone, but upon faith. And faith, as Turhan told Fatima in the darkness of the forest, does not crack. It does not crumble. It endures. Dawn comes slowly to Bursa. The sky in the east lightens from black to grey to the pale rose of early morning, and the first birds begin their songs, and the city stirs from its uneasy sleep. The gates open. The merchants set out their wares. The soldiers change their watch. And in the palace, in the chamber of Aladdin, a messenger arrives with news that Turhan has returned, that Fatima is safe, that they ride even now through the outer gates. Aladdin rises. He walks to the door, and for the first time since the previous evening, something like relief passes across his weathered face. He says to Malhan, who rises beside him, let us go to meet them. Let us show our daughter that whatever storms may come, her family stands with her. And they walk together through the corridors of the palace, through the great hall where the torches still burn, though the dawn light filters through the high windows, through the courtyard where servants pause in their work to bow as they pass. And they reach the outer gate just as Turhan rides through, and behind him rides Fatima, and behind her ride Abdul Rahman and the soldiers who ventured into the darkness to bring her home. Fatima dismounts. She stands before her parents, and for a long moment no one speaks. And then Malhan steps forward and takes her daughter in her arms, and Fatima at last allows the tears to fall. She weeps upon her mother's shoulder, great racking sobs that shake her entire body, and Malhan holds her and strokes her hair and whispers, it is over. It is over. You are home. You are safe. And Aladdin stands beside them, his hand upon Fatima's back, his eyes bright with unshed tears of his own, and he says, nothing that happened last night diminishes you, my daughter. Nothing that man did or said or hid reflects upon your honor. The shame belongs to him and to him alone, and he will answer for it. I swear to you upon my life, he will answer for it. And Turhan stands apart, watching this reunion, and upon his face there is no emotion, only the calm vigilance of a man who has fulfilled his duty and now waits for the next command. Abdul Rahman stands beside him, and between them passes a look of shared understanding, the silent communication of soldiers who have seen too much to be surprised by anything, but who remain, despite everything, committed to the cause they serve. And the sun rises over Bursa. It illuminates the towers and the walls and the streets where the people go about their daily lives, unaware of the dramas that have played out within the palace, unaware of the forces that gather in the darkness beyond the city limits. It illuminates the face of a sporcher who stands at her window and watches the dawn and wonders what the new day will bring. It illuminates the face of Nilafar, who lies in her bed and pretends to sleep, but whose mind is racing with thoughts she cannot share. It illuminates the face of Mahmud, who sits in his chamber with a small smile upon his lips, contemplating the board and the pieces and the moves that remain to be played. And it illuminates the face of Evanos. He sits alone in a small room in the servants' quarters, where he was taken after the revelation, where he has spent the entire night in solitary contemplation of his own ruin. His face is haggard. His eyes are hollow. He has not slept. He has not eaten. He has done nothing but sit and stare at the wall and replay in his mind the moment when his past came crashing through the carefully constructed walls of his present. He thinks of Fatima. He thinks of the way she looked at him when the truth was spoken. He thinks of the love he saw in her eyes turn to ash, replaced by something worse than hatred, replaced by the devastating recognition of betrayal. And he knows that no apology will be sufficient, that no explanation will bridge the chasm that has opened between them, that the future he imagined, the life he was building, has been torn apart as thoroughly as if it had never existed. And he thinks of Thalia, the woman he abandoned, the child he never acknowledged, the past he tried to bury beneath years of new beginnings. He thought he had escaped it. He thought that if he traveled far enough, if he changed his name, if he built a new identity from the ground up, the old life would simply fade away like a dream upon waking. But the past does not fade. It waits, it endures, and it always, always finds its way back to the surface. There is a knock upon the door. Evanos raises his head. He says, "Enter." The door opens, and Damia Khan steps inside. His face is unreadable, but his eyes carry the weight of judgment, the hard assessment of a man who has seen the evidence and drawn his conclusions. He says, "Evanos Saab, or should I say Faladios, you are summoned to appear before the council. Sultan Orhan has convened an assembly to determine your fate." Evanos rises slowly. His legs feel weak beneath him. He says, "I will come." And he follows Damia Khan through the corridors of the palace, through the great hall where the nobles and commanders have already gathered, through the door that leads to the council chamber where Sultan Orhan sits upon his seat of authority, and where the eyes of everyone present turn to fix upon the man who deceived them all. The chamber falls silent. Evanos walks to the center of the room and stops. He does not kneel. He does not bow. He stands straight because whatever else may be said of him, he will not face his judgment as a coward. Sultan Orhan looks upon him, and the Sultan's eyes are hard as stone, but they are not cruel. They carry within them the terrible burden of a man who must render justice, who must weigh the claims of mercy against the demands of truth, who must make decisions that will affect the lives of many based upon the actions of one. The Sultan says, "Evanos, you came to this house seeking a new life. You were welcomed as a brother. You were offered the hand of a daughter of this family, and in return you gave us lies." Evanos says nothing. There is nothing to say. The Sultan continues, "A woman has come before us with a child who bears your blood. She claims that you made promises to her, that you abandoned her, that you built your new life upon the ruins of the life you left behind." Still Evanos says nothing. The Sultan says, "What answer do you give to these accusations?" And at last Evanos speaks. His voice is quiet, but it carries in the silent chamber. He says, "The accusations are true. I do not deny them. I was young. I was foolish. I made choices that I have regretted every day since. But I truly believed, that the past could be left behind, that a man could be reborn, that the sins of yesterday need not define the possibilities of tomorrow." The Sultan says, "And what of the woman and child you abandoned? Did you believe that they too could be left behind, that their suffering counted for nothing?" Evanos closes his eyes. He says, "I told myself that they would be better off without me, that my presence would only bring them more pain. But I know now that I was deceiving myself. I was not thinking of them. I was thinking only of my own escape." The chamber murmurs. The nobles and commanders exchange glances. Some faces show contempt. Others show something like pity. And still others show the calculating assessment of men, wondering how this revelation will shift the balance of power within the house. The Sultan raises his hand, and the murmuring ceases. He says, "You have confessed your guilt. Now you must face the consequences. The marriage that was to take place is annulled. There will be no alliance between your house and mine. You will make provision for the woman and child you abandoned, sufficient to ensure their welfare for the remainder of their lives. And you will leave Bursa within 3 days and not return unless summoned." Evanos opens his eyes. He looks at the Sultan. he says, and Fatima, will I be permitted to speak with her? The Sultan's jaw tightens. He says, that is not my decision to make. It is hers, and I would counsel you not to seek her out unless she indicates her willingness to hear you. The wound you have inflicted is deep. It will not be healed by words. Evanos bows his head. He says, I understand, and I accept your judgment, Sultan. I deserve far worse. And then he turns, and he walks from the chamber, and the doors close behind him, and the council is left to absorb what has transpired, to discuss the implications, to begin the long process of repairing the damage that one man's deception has wrought. And the sun continues its climb over Bursa, and the day unfolds with its thousand small dramas and its ordinary concerns. And somewhere in the palace, Fatima sits alone in her chamber, her tears dried, her face composed into an expression of perfect calm, but behind her eyes there churns a storm that will not be stilled for many days to come. And somewhere beyond the walls, Yakid and Difner make their plans. They have won a victory, but they know it is only one battle in a longer war. They know that the House of Orhan is wounded but not broken, that their enemies will regroup and respond, that the next phase of the conflict will require even greater cunning, even more audacious gambits. And the war goes on. It goes on in the council chambers where strategies are debated. It goes on in the training grounds where soldiers sharpen their skills. It goes on in the quiet conversations between husbands and wives, between parents and children, between allies whose trust has been tested and whose bonds must be reforged in the fire of shared adversity. And it goes on in the hearts of every soul who calls Bursa home, who looks to the House of Orhan for protection, who places their faith in the justice of the Sultan and the courage of his warriors. Because the war is never over, it merely changes its face. And those who believe they have found peace are merely standing in the eye of the storm, surrounded on all sides by winds that have not yet reached them but are coming, always coming, inevitable as the dawn, merciless as the desert sun. And the dawn has come, and the day has begun. And whatever it brings, the House of Orhan will face it together, as they have always faced the challenges of their time, with faith in their hearts and steel in their hands, and the unshakable conviction that truth, though it may be buried, will always claw its way to the surface. And the story continues. It will always continue. For as long as there are those who seek justice and those who seek power, as long as there are those who build and those who destroy, as long as the human heart contains within it the capacity for both love and hatred, the story will continue. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolls across the mountains. And somewhere in the darkness, eyes watch and wait. And the war is not over. It has only just begun. Peace be upon you, dear viewers. The morning light pours through the latticed windows of the Bursa Palace like molten gold spilling across cold stone, and the corridors that were filled with chaos only hours ago now hold a silence so heavy that it seems to press upon the walls themselves, as though the very palace is holding its breath, waiting for the next blow to fall. The servants move in whispers. The soldiers stand at their posts with hands upon hilts and eyes that sweep the courtyards with a vigilance sharpened by the events of the previous night. And in every chamber, behind every closed door, the consequences of revelation are being measured, weighed, and endured. Fatima has not emerged from her room since her return at dawn. The door remains closed. No food has been accepted. No visitor has been received. Malhan Khatun came to the door twice during the morning hours, and both times she pressed her palm flat against the wood and listened. And both times she heard nothing, no weeping, no movement, only the terrible silence of a woman who has withdrawn so far into herself that even grief cannot reach her. Malhan turned away both times with the expression of a mother who knows that some wounds cannot be healed by presence alone, that some sufferings must be endured in solitude before they can be shared. And Goncha watched her mother walk away from that door, and something shifted inside her, a recognition that the joy she felt only hours ago, when Mahmud held her in his arms and called her sister, was now overshadowed by a sorrow that touched the entire household. She finds Halima in the women's quarters, sitting by the window with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the henna upon her palm that has finally, with the coming of the morning, begun to darken, though its color remains uneven, patchy, as though the dye itself could not decide whether to commit. Halima looks up as Goncha enters, and her eyes carry the weight of a woman who feels the currents shifting beneath her feet. Goncha sits beside her. She says, "How is the color now?" And Halima holds up her hand, turning it in the light, and she says, "It has taken, but not well, not the way it should." And then she drops her hand to her lap and says, "But it does not matter any more, does it? There is no wedding now. The henna was for celebration, and there is nothing to celebrate." Goncha takes Halima's hand in hers. She says, "There will be celebrations again. Inshallah, there will be days of joy that make us forget these hours of sorrow." But Halima shakes her head slowly, and she says, "I'm not so sure anymore, Goncha. I look around this palace and I see cracks everywhere, between husband and wife, between brother and sister, between father and son, between the truth we tell the world and the secrets we keep locked inside. And I wonder, how many more revelations can this family endure before it breaks apart entirely?" Goncha has no answer for this. She sits beside Halima in the quiet morning light, and they hold hands, and they say nothing more, because sometimes the most honest response to uncertainty is silence. And in the courtyard below their window, Tarhan walks with Abdul Rahman, and their boots strike the stone in measured cadence, the rhythm of soldiers whose bodies move with purpose even when their minds are troubled. Tarhan has not slept. The shadows beneath his eyes are dark as bruises, but his posture is erect, his stride unwavering, his gaze sharp as the blade that hangs at his side. He says, "We must increase the patrols along the forest road." Yaqid was bold enough to confront Fatima Khatun within an hour's ride of the palace. That means he has established a position nearby, a camp, a network. He is not operating alone. Abdul Rahman nods. He says, "Damia Khan has been questioning the woman Falia since before dawn. She has given us details that suggest Difnair has been in contact with several elements within the surrounding villages. Merchants, informants, perhaps even sympathizers within our own ranks." Tarhan stops walking. He turns to Abdul Rahman and his eyes narrow. He says, "Within our ranks," and Abdul Rahman meets his gaze steadily. He says, "It is a possibility we cannot ignore, Tarhan Saab. The timing of last night's events was too precise. The woman entered the compound through a passage that should have been sealed. Someone opened it for her. Someone inside these walls." The silence that follows this statement stretches like a wire pulled taut, and in it there vibrates the terrible implication of treachery, not merely from without, but from within, from someone who walks among them wearing the mask of loyalty while harboring the intentions of an enemy. Tarhan says, "Find Shamal. Have him compile a list of every soldier and servant who was on duty last night. Every one. I want to know where each of them was, what they were doing, and who they spoke to. If there is a traitor among us, I will find him, and when I do, he will wish he had never been born." Abdul Rahman says, "It will be done." And he turns and walks away with the urgency of a man who understands that every hour of delay gives the enemy another hour to cover their tracks. And Tarhan stands alone in the courtyard, and the morning sun warms his face, but does nothing to warm the coldness that has settled in his chest. He has served the house of Orhan for as long as he can remember. He has bled for it. He has killed for it. He has watched friends die in its defense and enemies fall before its justice. And the thought that someone within these walls, someone who has eaten at the same table and prayed in the same mosque and stood shoulder to shoulder in the same battles, that someone has betrayed them, this thought burns in him like a coal pressed against bare skin. He walks to the training ground. He draws his sword, and he begins to practice, alone in the early morning light, the blade cutting the air in arcs of silver, his movements precise and controlled, each strike a meditation, each parry a prayer, the ancient discipline of the warrior channeled into the controlled fury of a man who needs to feel the weight of steel in his hand to remind himself that there are still things in this world that are certain, that are true, that cannot be corrupted by lies. And watching him from the balcony above, unseen, stands a Sporcher Khatun. She has been awake since before dawn, unable to sleep, her mind replaying the conversation with Sultan Orhan, his words, his touch. The way he took her hand and held it as though it were something precious, something fragile, something he feared might break if he held it too tightly. She stands at the railing and watches Turhan's blade flash in the sunlight, and she thinks about strength, about what it means to be strong, about whether strength is the ability to wield a sword or the ability to endure the cut of one. And then she hears footsteps behind her. She turns, and there stands Nilafar. The two women regard each other across the small distance of the balcony, and between them flows a current of tension so powerful that the air itself seems to crackle with it. Nilafar's face is composed, but her eyes are red-rimmed, evidence of a night spent in sleepless contemplation. She says, "I see you are watching the training ground. Do you admire the swordsmanship, or do you simply enjoy watching warriors from above?" Esportia says, "I was not watching the warriors, Nilafar. I was watching the morning. It is beautiful." Nilafar steps closer. She says, "Everything about this palace seems to fascinate you, Esportia. The mornings, the corridors, the company of the Sultan, especially the company of the Sultan." And there it is, the blade, unsheathed at last. Esportia feels it cut, feels the sharp edge of Nilafar's jealousy slice through the fragile calm she has been maintaining since the previous night. She says, "Nilafar, I did not seek the Sultan's company. He came to me." Nilafar says he comes to everyone. It is his duty as Sultan. Do not mistake duty for devotion, Esportia. Do not mistake kindness for love. You are new here. You do not yet understand the ways of this house, but I will teach you. I have had years to learn. Esportia's hands grip the railing. She says, "I understand more than you think, Nilafar. I understand what it means to be alone in a place where every face is a stranger's face. I understand what it means to reach out for acceptance and be met with suspicion. And I understand what it means to care for someone who is bound by obligations that stretch in every direction, pulling him away from every soul who needs him." Nilafar's eyes flash. She says, "Do not presume to compare your understanding with mine. I have stood beside Orhan through wars and sieges and the births of our children. I have held this family together when the world tried to tear it apart. I have earned my place beside him. And you, Esportia, you arrived yesterday, and you think that a conversation and a touch of the hand gives you a claim upon his heart." Esportia says, "I make no claims, Nilafar. I did not choose to come here. Fate brought me, and I have tried again and again to find my place within this household without threatening yours. But you see me as an enemy, and I do not know how to fight an enemy who wears the face of a sister." And Nilafar draws a breath, a deep, shuddering breath that carries within it the weight of everything she has held inside. The fear, the jealousy, the terrible knowledge that the man she loves is capable of caring for another, that his heart is large enough to hold more than one soul, and that this generosity of spirit, which she has always admired in him as a ruler, now terrifies her as a wife. She says, "I do not hate you, Esportia. I wish I could. It would be easier if I did. But I do not. I see in you a woman who has suffered, who has lost her homeland and her father and everything she once knew. And I feel for you. I truly do. But my compassion and my fear live side by side, and I cannot silence one without silencing the other." And Esportia looks at her, and for the first time since she arrived in Bursa, she sees Nilafar not as an obstacle or an adversary, but as a woman, a human being carrying burdens of her own, fighting battles that are invisible to the eye, but no less devastating for their invisibility. She says, "I do not wish to take anything from you, Nilafar. I swear it upon everything I hold sacred. I only wish to exist, to breathe, to find a corner of this world where I am not a burden, not a threat, not a problem to be solved." And Nilafar looks at her, and for a long moment the two women stand on that balcony, with the morning sun warming their faces and the sound of Turhan's sword cutting the air below, and something passes between them, not friendship, not yet, perhaps not ever, but something like recognition, the acknowledgement of two souls caught in the same current, pulled by the same forces, struggling to keep their heads above the same rising water. And then Nilafar turns and walks away. She does not say goodbye. She does not offer reconciliation, but she also does not strike again. And sometimes, in a war fought not with swords but with silences, the absence of a blow is the closest thing to peace. A sporcher watches her go, and then she turns back to the railing, and below, Tarhan has finished his practice. He sheathes his sword. He stands in the center of the training ground, his chest heaving, sweat glistening upon his brow, and he looks up, and for a brief moment his eyes meet a sporcher's. He does not wave. He does not speak. He simply nods the smallest of gestures, the warrior's acknowledgement of another soul who is enduring, who is fighting, who is refusing to be defeated. And then he turns and walks away. And the day moves forward. The sun climbs higher. The shadows shorten and shift. And in the council chamber, Sultan Orhan convenes a meeting of his closest advisers to address not only the matter of Evenos, but the larger threat that Yakid's actions represent. The men gather. Tarhan stands to the Sultan's right, his customary position, his sword at his side, his eyes scanning every face in the room with the quiet intensity of a man who now suspects that the enemy may wear a familiar face. Abdul Rahman stands to the Sultan's left. Damir Khan sits at the long table, his notes from the interrogation of Falia spread before him. Shamal stands near the door, his arms crossed, his expression grim. Mustafa, the veteran captain whose loyalty has been tested in a dozen campaigns, occupies a seat near the end of the table, his scarred hands folded before him, his old eyes watchful. And then the doors open, and two more figures enter. Mahmud, who walks with the measured stride of a man conscious of being observed, and Aladdin, whose face bears the marks of a sleepless night and a father's pain. They take their places, and the chamber falls silent, and all eyes turn to the Sultan. Sultan Orhan speaks. He says, the events of last night have exposed not merely the deceptions of one man, but the machinations of an enemy who has been working against us with patience and precision. Yakid is not acting alone. He has allies. He has resources. And most concerning of all, he has intelligence. He knew the timing of the wedding. He knew how to infiltrate our compound. He knew that Fatima would ride out alone if provoked. This is not the work of a desperate exile. This is the work of a coordinated campaign designed to undermine this house from within. He pauses. His eyes sweep the room. He says, Damir Khan, what have you learned from the woman Falia? Damir Khan rises. He says, the woman confirms that she was contacted by Difner approximately 3 weeks ago. Difner provided her with money, transportation, and instructions. She was told to come to Bursa on the night before the wedding and to make her presence known in the most dramatic fashion possible. She was given access to the compound through a maintenance passage on the eastern wall, a passage that is used by servants to dispose of kitchen waste, and that should have been secured from the inside. The Sultan says, who had access to that passage. Damir Khan says, I have compiled a list of 12 individuals who were assigned to the eastern sector of the palace last night. With your permission, I will interrogate each of them. The Sultan nods. He says, proceed, and leave no stone unturned. If there is a traitor among us, I want his name before the sun sets. Tarhan steps forward. He says, there is another matter, Sultan. Last night, when I pursued Fatima Khatun into the forest, I encountered Yakid and approximately 15 armed men. They were waiting for her. This was not a chance meeting. They knew she would ride that road. They knew the approximate time she would arrive. This means they had advanced knowledge not only of the events within the palace, but of Fatima's likely reaction to those events. The room falls silent. The implications of Tarhan's words settle upon the gathered men like a weight. Abdul Rahman says, someone within this palace is feeding information to Yakid. Someone who knows our movements, our schedules, our personal vulnerabilities. Mustafa speaks for the first time. His voice is rough, the voice of a man who has spent decades shouting commands across battlefields. He says, with all due respect, we are chasing shadows. Yakid is a cunning man, but he is also desperate. Desperate men take bold risks. It is possible that his intelligence came not from a traitor within our ranks, but from observation, from the network of informants that Difner has cultivated in the surrounding villages, from the simple fact that anyone watching the palace for the past several weeks would have been able to deduce that a wedding was imminent and that the household would be in a state of heightened emotion. Tarhen turns to Mustafa. He says, "I respect your experience, Mustafa, but the passage on the eastern wall was opened from the inside. That is not observation, that is collaboration." And Mustafa falls silent, because the evidence is irrefutable, and even a veteran's instinct to resist the idea of betrayal from within must yield before the cold logic of facts. Mahmud, who has been listening in silence throughout the discussion, now speaks. He says, "Perhaps we are looking at this from the wrong angle. Instead of trying to identify the traitor, we should be asking ourselves what Yakid's ultimate objective is. Last night's events were designed to cause disruption, yes. To prevent the wedding, certainly. But Yakid is not a man who acts for the sake of causing pain alone. He has a larger goal. And if we can determine what that goal is, we can anticipate his next move and prepare accordingly." The Sultan regards Mahmud with the careful scrutiny of a man who has learned to look beyond the surface of his son's words. He says, "And what do you believe his goal is, Mahmud?" Mahmud says, "Power. It is always power. Yakid was once a man of influence. He lost that influence because of his own treachery, and he blames this house for his downfall. He wants to return to a position of authority, and to do that, he must first weaken the structure that expelled him. He is not trying to destroy us outright. He is trying to make us destroy ourselves. Division within the family, suspicion among the commanders, the erosion of trust between allies. These are the weapons he uses. And last night was merely the latest salvo in a campaign that has been ongoing for months." Alorden says, "My son speaks with insight, but insight alone will not protect us. We need action. We need to find Yakid and end this threat before he can strike again." Tarhen says, "I will lead a reconnaissance force into the forest. We know the area where I encountered Yakid last night. We will sweep the region, identify his camp, and report back with a detailed assessment of his strength and positions." The Sultan nods. He says, "Take 30 men. Tarhen, Abdul Rahman, and Damia Khan will lead. Mustafa, you will remain here and oversee the security of the palace. Shamal, you will coordinate with the city guard to ensure that no unauthorized persons enter or leave Bursa without being questioned." He rises. He says this house has weathered storms before. It has endured the treachery of enemies and the failures of friends. It has stood when others have fallen, and it will stand again. But we must be vigilant. We must be united. And we must be willing to do what is necessary, however painful it may be, to protect what we have built. The men rise. They bow. They file out of the chamber, each carrying with them the weight of their assignments and the knowledge that the coming days will test them in ways they have not yet imagined. And the Sultan stands alone in the empty chamber. He looks at the map spread across the table, the detailed rendering of Bursa and its surroundings, the forests and the mountains, and the roads that connect this city to the wider world. He traces the road to the east, the road that leads through the forest where Yakid lurks, and his finger follows it until it reaches the border of the Byzantine territories, and there it stops. He thinks of the larger game, the game that extends beyond Yakid and Difne, beyond the personal vendettas and the domestic upheavals, to the great struggle between empires, between civilizations, between visions of the world that cannot coexist. He knows that the internal divisions within his house are not merely personal. They are reflections of the larger forces at work, the pressures exerted by the Byzantine emperor, the machinations of the Mongol envoys, the shifting allegiances of the Turkish beyliks that surround his domain. Every crack in his household is a crack in his kingdom, and his enemies, all of them, are watching for the moment when the cracks align and the structure fails. He picks up a chess piece from the board that sits upon the corner of the table, a black knight. He holds it in his palm and studies it, and then he places it upon the map, upon the road that leads into the forest. He says to the empty room, to the listening walls, to the God in whom he places his ultimate trust, "Guide my hand, strengthen my sword, illuminate my path, and if this house must pass through fire to emerge purified, then let the fire come, but let us not be consumed." And outside, the preparations begin. Tarhen leads the 30 men to the armory, where swords are sharpened and arrows are inspected, and armor is fitted with the meticulous care of soldiers who know that the difference between life and death can rest upon the tightness of a strap or the keenness of an edge. Abdul Rahman oversees the provisioning, ensuring that each man carries enough food and water for 3 days in the field. Damir Khan gathers his intelligence reports and studies the terrain maps, marking the locations where Yakid's scouts have been spotted, drawing lines of probability that converge upon a small valley deep in the forest where the trees grow so thick that sunlight barely reaches the ground. And in the women's quarters, Eraz comes to Fatima's door. She stands outside it for a long time, her hand raised but not knocking, her heart racing with the uncertainty of one who wishes to offer comfort but does not know whether her comfort will be welcomed. And then she knocks, softly, once, twice, 3 times. And from behind the door comes Fatima's voice. Enter. Eraz opens the door and steps inside. The room is dim. The curtains are drawn. Fatima sits upon the floor, not the bed, upon the bare, cold stone, her back against the wall, her knees drawn up to her chest, her arms wrapped around them. She looks up at Eraz with eyes that are dry but devastated, the eyes of a woman who has moved beyond tears into a landscape of pain that lies beyond the reach of weeping. Eraz kneels beside her. She does not speak. She does not offer platitudes or promises. She simply kneels, and she takes Fatima's hand, and she holds it, and they sit together in the dim room, and the silence between them is not empty but full, full of shared understanding, full of the unspoken bond between women who have endured the particular cruelty of loving men who prove themselves unworthy. And after a long time, Fatima speaks. She says, I loved him, Eraz. I truly loved him, not the idea of him, not the advantage of the alliance. Him, the way he laughed, the way he held his sword, the way he looked at me when he thought I was not watching. And all of it was a lie, every moment, every word, every look. A performance staged by a man who knew exactly what I wanted to see and showed it to me with the skill of an actor upon a stage. Eraz squeezes her hand. She says, not everything was a lie, Fatima. A man can deceive others, but he cannot entirely deceive his own heart. There were moments, I believe, when what he felt for you was genuine. But a man who hides his past cannot be trusted with your future, and you deserve a future built upon truth. Fatima says, I do not want to think about the future right now. I cannot see beyond this moment. I cannot see beyond this room. Eraz says, then do not try. Stay here. Stay in this moment. And when you are ready, when the pain has dulled enough to allow you to move, you will rise. And you will walk out of this room. And you will face the world with the same strength that your mother shows, the same courage that your father embodies, because you are their daughter, and their blood runs in your veins, and their spirit lives in your heart. And Fatima looks at Eraz, and something flickers in her eyes, not hope, not yet, but the faintest acknowledgement that hope still exists, that it has not been extinguished entirely, that somewhere beneath the wreckage of her trust there still glows a small ember that might, with time and care, be coaxed back into flame. And outside the palace walls, Tarhin leads his men out through the gates. They ride in column formation, 3 abreast, their banners furled to avoid detection, their movements swift and disciplined. The forest waits for them, dark and deep and full of secrets, and they ride into it with the grim determination of men who know that what they seek within those shadowed halls of wood and stone may well be their death, but who ride forward nonetheless, because duty demands it, because honor requires it, because the alternative, the passivity of waiting for the enemy to strike again, is intolerable to men of their caliber. And behind them, Bursa recedes into the distance, its towers and walls growing smaller against the sky, and the road ahead stretches into the unknown, and the wind carries upon it the scent of pine and earth and something else, something metallic, something that might be blood. And the war continues. It continues in the forest where Turhan rides. It continues in the palace where Fatima grieves. It continues in the council chamber where strategies are debated and alliances are tested. It continues in the hearts of men and women who carry within them the contradictions of love and duty, of loyalty and desire, of the need to forgive and the impossibility of forgetting. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, Yakid sits beside a fire. The flames cast dancing shadows upon his face, and beside him Difness sits with her hands extended toward the warmth, and around them their followers gather, armed and watchful, and Yakid stares into the flames and sees within them the shapes of his revenge, the forms of those who wronged him twisting and burning and turning to ash. He says they will send soldiers. Tarhan will lead them. He always does. He is predictable in his courage, consistent in his honor, and that consistency is his weakness. Because a man who always does the honorable thing can be led, can be guided, can be maneuvered into positions from which even honor cannot save him. Difness says the woman played her part well. The palace is in chaos. The wedding is destroyed. Fatima is broken. And the suspicion we have planted, the fear of a traitor within their ranks, will consume their attention for days. They will turn upon each other. They will interrogate their own loyal servants. And while they are looking inward, we will strike from without. Yakid smiles. It is the smile of a man who has waited a long time for this moment, who has endured years of exile and humiliation and hunger for the sake of this campaign, who has sacrificed everything upon the altar of his vengeance, and who now sees the first fruits of that sacrifice beginning to ripen. He says, the Sultan believes he can hold his house together through force of will. He believes that faith and duty and the bonds of family are sufficient to withstand any assault. But he is wrong, because I know those bonds intimately. I know where they are strong and where they are weak, and I know exactly which threads to pull to unravel the entire tapestry. He reaches into the fire and withdraws a burning stick, and he holds it before his eyes, watching the flame dance upon its tip, and he says, let the house of Orhan burn. Let it burn with the same fire that has burned in my heart since the day they cast me out. And when the ashes have cooled, I will walk upon them, and I will build my own house upon the ruins of theirs. And the fire crackles, and the shadows dance, and the night deepens around them, thick and cold and full of the promise of violence. And the war is not over. It has merely entered its next phase. The phase of the hunt, the phase of the trap, the phase where every step forward may lead into an ambush and every retreat may be a feint designed to draw the enemy deeper into the web. And Tarhan rides through the darkness, his sword at his side, his heart steady, his mind clear. He does not know what awaits him in the depths of the forest. He does not know whether the trail he follows will lead him to victory or to ruin. But he rides on, because that is what he has always done, because that is who he is, the blade of the faithful, the shield of the righteous, the man who rides into the darkness so that others may dwell in the light. And behind him the soldiers follow, and above them the stars wheel in their eternal dance. And somewhere in the palace of Bursa, a woman sits upon the cold stone floor and holds the hand of a friend and waits for the strength to rise. And the story continues. It will always continue, because the war is never over. It merely changes its face. And those who fight it, those who endure it, those who love and grieve and hope and rage within its endless turning, they are the ones who give it meaning. They are the ones who transform the raw chaos of conflict into something that approaches, however imperfectly, the shape of justice. And the dawn is coming. It is always coming. And when it arrives, it will illuminate not a world at peace, but a world in motion, a world of blades and banners and broken hearts and unbreakable spirits, a world where the only certainty is that the fight will go on, that the story will continue, that the final chapter has not yet been written. And until it is written, the warriors ride, the women wait, the fires burn, and the darkness holds its breath. And the war is not over. It is far from over. Peace be upon you, dear viewers. The forest swallows Tarhan and his men like a great beast, opening its mouth to consume those who dare to enter its domain. The trees press close on either side of the narrow path, their branches interlocking overhead to form a canopy so dense that the moonlight can barely penetrate, falling in scattered fragments upon the forest floor like pieces of broken silver. The horses move carefully now, their hooves finding purchase upon the uneven ground with the instinct of animals bred for war, and the soldiers ride in silence, their hands upon their weapons, their eyes straining against the darkness that seems to thicken with every step they take deeper into the wood. Tarhan rides at the head of the column, and beside him rides Abdul Rahman, and between them there passes no conversation. only the shared awareness of men who have ridden into danger together so many times that words have become unnecessary. They communicate through glances, through the subtle shift of weight in the saddle, through the almost imperceptible tightening of fingers upon reins that signals alertness, readiness, the coiled potential of violence held in check until the moment of release. Damir Khan rides behind them, his mind working through the intelligence he has gathered, mapping the forest in his imagination, calculating distances and probabilities, and the thousand small factors that might determine whether this expedition ends in triumph or tragedy. They have been riding for 3 hours when Turhan raises his hand and the column stops. The silence that follows is absolute, broken only by the soft breathing of the horses and the distant hoot of an owl that echoes through the trees like a question asked of the darkness. Turhan dismounts. He walks forward alone, his feet silent upon the carpet of fallen leaves, and he kneels at a point where the path branches, one fork leading north toward the mountains, and the other curving east toward the valley that Damir Khan identified as the most likely location of Yakid's camp. He studies the ground. Even in the dim light, his trained eyes can read the signs. Hoofprints, many of them, fresh, pressed deep into the soft earth by the weight of horses carrying armed men. They lead east toward the valley, and overlapping them, heading in the opposite direction, are the prints of a single horse, smaller, lighter, moving fast. He touches the edge of one print and feels the moisture still seeping from the disturbed soil. He rises and returns to the column. He speaks softly, his voice barely above a whisper. He says, a large group passed through here recently, heading toward the valley. But one rider broke away and headed north. The prints are fresh, within the last hour. Abdul Rahman says, a scout perhaps, or a messenger. Damir Khan says, if it is a messenger, he may be carrying word of our approach. Yakid could be preparing an ambush even now. Turhan considers this. He says, we cannot pursue both trails. We must choose. If we follow the main group, we may find Yakid's camp. But if we let the single rider go, he may alert other elements we do not yet know about. Or he may be heading somewhere more important, somewhere that reveals the larger scope of Yakid's network. Abdul Rahman says, divide the force. I will take 10 men and pursue the single rider. You continue to the valley with the rest. Turhan shakes his head. He says, no, we cannot afford to weaken ourselves. If Yakid has 15 men as we saw last night, and there are others we have not yet counted, we need every sword we have. The single rider will have to wait. Our priority is the camp. And so the decision is made. The column reforms, and they take the eastern fork, and they ride deeper into the forest, toward the valley, toward whatever waits for them in the darkness ahead. And behind them, unnoticed, a figure watches from the shadows. The figure is mounted upon a dark horse, dressed in clothes that blend with the forest, face obscured by a hood. The figure watches the column pass, counts the soldiers, notes the direction they are heading. And then the figure turns and rides silently in the opposite direction, northward, toward the mountains, carrying with them the knowledge of Turhan's approach. Back in Bursa, the palace has settled into an uneasy quiet. The servants go about their duties with the hushed efficiency of those who sense that something is wrong, but do not yet know the full extent of it. The guards stand at their posts with heightened vigilance, checking and rechecking the locks, scanning the walls and gates for any sign of intrusion. And in the chamber of Sultan Orhan, the Sultan himself has not slept. He stands at the window, looking out at the night, his hands clasped behind his back, his face illuminated by the single candle that burns upon the table behind him. He has been standing in this position for hours, thinking, planning, wrestling with the demons of doubt that plague even the most resolute of rulers. He thinks of his children, of the fractures that have appeared in the bonds between them. He thinks of his wives, of the tension between Nilafar and Asportia that threatens to tear the fabric of his household. He thinks of his commanders, of the possibility that one of them might be feeding information to the enemy. And he thinks of Yakid, of the man who was once a trusted ally, who served this house with what appeared to be unwavering loyalty, until the day his ambitions outgrew his position and he chose betrayal over honor. He remembers that day. He remembers the moment when the truth of Yakid's treachery was revealed, the evidence laid out before the council, the faces of the men who had trusted him twisted with disbelief and then with rage. He remembers the sentence that was passed, exile rather than execution, mercy shown to a man who had shown none to those he betrayed. And he wonders now, as he has wondered many times in the years since, whether that mercy was wisdom or folly, whether sparing Yakid's life was an act of justice or a failure of resolve that has now returned to haunt him. There is a knock at the door. The Sultan turns. He says, "Enter." The door opens and Mustafa steps inside. The old captain's face is grave, his movements deliberate. He bows and says, "Sultan, I bring news." The Sultan says, "Speak." Mustafa says, "We have completed the initial interrogation of the servants and soldiers who were on duty last night. Most can account for their whereabouts. But there is one, a servant named Karim, who was assigned to the eastern sector but was not at his post during the critical hours. When questioned, he claimed he was ill and had gone to the kitchen for water. But the kitchen staff say they did not see him." The Sultan's jaw tightens. He says, "Where is this Karim now?" Mustafa says, "He is being held in the guardhouse. We await your orders." The Sultan says, "Bring him to me, now." Mustafa bows and withdraws, and the Sultan turns back to the window, and the candlelight throws his shadow long across the floor, and he prepares himself for what must come next, the confrontation with a man who may be the traitor they seek, the extraction of truth from one who has wrapped himself in lies. And in the darkness of the forest, Tarhan's column approaches the valley. The trees begin to thin, and the land slopes downward, and through the gaps in the canopy the moon can be seen, full and bright, casting its cold light upon the world below. Tarhan signals for the column to halt, and they dismount, and they lead their horses by hand, moving with the silent precision of soldiers trained for exactly this kind of operation. They reach the edge of the tree line and look down into the valley below, and what they see makes their blood run cold. The camp is larger than they expected, much larger. Where they anticipated 15 or 20 men, they see at least 50, perhaps more, arranged in orderly rows of tents that stretch across the valley floor. Fires burn at regular intervals, illuminating the faces of the men who sit around them, and even from this distance, Tarhan can see that these are not the desperate followers of a fallen exile. These are trained soldiers, armed and armored, their movements disciplined, their camp organized with military precision. Abdul Rahman whispers, "This is no raiding party. This is an army." Damir Khan says, "Yakid has been gathering strength in secret for months, perhaps years, building his force in the wilderness, waiting for the right moment to strike." Tarhan's mind races. 30 men against 50 or more. The odds are not in their favor. If they attack now, they will be cut down before they reach the first row of tents. If they withdraw and return to Bursa for reinforcements, Yakid may learn of their presence and relocate, vanishing into the wilderness once more. Every option carries risk. Every decision leads to danger. He says, "We observe. We count their numbers, assess their armaments, identify their command structure. And then we return to Bursa with a complete picture of what we face. The Sultan must know the full scope of this threat before any action is taken." Abdul Rahman nods. He says, "I will take 5 men and circle to the southern edge of the valley. We will observe from there and rendezvous with you at the old oak where the path divides." Tarhan says, "Go, but do not engage, under any circumstances. If they spot you, withdraw immediately." Abdul Rahman clasps Tarhan's shoulder briefly, the wordless gesture of brothers in arms, and then he is gone, melting into the darkness with 5 soldiers at his heels. And Tarhan settles into position at the edge of the tree line, his eyes fixed upon the camp below, his mind cataloguing every detail, every observation that might prove crucial in the battle to come. He notes the placement of the sentries, the rotation of their patrols, the vulnerable points in their perimeter. He notes the large tent at the center of the camp, grander than the others, likely the command post where Yakid himself resides. He notes the weapons racks arranged near the fires, the horses corralled at the eastern edge of the camp, the supply wagons parked beside the stream that runs through the valley floor. And as he watches, the flap of the central tent opens and a figure emerges. Even from this distance, even in the moonlight, Tarhan recognizes him. Yakid. The man walks with the confidence of one who believes himself secure, who has no idea that enemies watch from the darkness above. He moves among his men, pausing to speak with some, clapping others on the shoulder, projecting the image of a leader who commands loyalty through presence as much as through authority. Tarhan's hand tightens upon the hilt of his sword. Every instinct he possesses screams at him to descend upon the camp, to cut through the enemy ranks, to find Yakid and end this threat with a single stroke. But he masters himself. He forces his breathing to slow, his pulse to steady. He knows that discipline is the warrior's greatest weapon, that the man who acts upon impulse is the first to fall. And so he watches, and he waits. And he commits every detail to memory, for the report he will deliver to the Sultan. And then something happens that changes everything. A commotion at the edge of the camp. Shouts, movement, soldiers rushing toward the northern perimeter. And then, dragged between two guards, a figure is brought into the firelight. A woman, her hands are bound, her clothes are torn, her face is bloody but defiant. And Tarhan recognizes her. It is Defne. She has been captured by her own allies. And as Tarhan watches, unable to understand what he is seeing, Yakid approaches her. He stands before her, and even from this distance Tarhan can see the rage upon his face. He says something to her, words that do not carry to the tree line, and Defne responds, her chin raised, her voice carrying in fragments across the night air. Tarhan cannot make out the words, but he can read the posture, the defiance, the contempt. And then Yakid strikes her, a backhanded blow that sends her sprawling to the ground. And he shouts, loud enough now for the words to reach Tarhan's ears, loud enough for the entire camp to hear. He shouts, "You betrayed me, Defne. You thought you could play your own game within my game. You thought you could take the information you gathered and sell it to the highest bidder. But I know everything. I know about your contacts with the Byzantine Env. I know about the gold they promised you. And now you will pay the price that all traitors pay." And Defne, lying on the ground, laughs. It is a terrible sound, the laughter of a woman who knows she is about to die but refuses to show fear. She says, "You are a fool, Yakid. You think you control this war. You think you are the master of this game. But you are a pawn. You have always been a pawn. And when the real players are finished with you, they will discard you the way you are about to discard me." Yakid draws his sword. The blade gleams in the firelight. He raises it above her head. And Tarhan makes a decision. He does not think. He does not calculate. He acts. He rises from his concealment and knocks an arrow to his bow in a single fluid motion, and before anyone in the camp can register what is happening, the arrow is flying, singing through the air, crossing the distance in less than a heartbeat. The arrow strikes Yakid's sword arm. The blade falls from his grip. He screams in pain and rage. And then chaos erupts. The camp comes alive with shouts and running figures. Soldiers scramble for weapons. Fires flare as men kick over pots and stumble through the confusion. And from the tree line, Tarhan and his remaining soldiers emerge, charging down the slope with swords drawn and battle cries upon their lips. It is madness. It is suicide. 25 men against 50. But Tarhan has calculated, even in the heat of the moment, that the confusion caused by his arrow, by the revelation of Defne's betrayal, by the sudden appearance of enemies where none were expected, will give them a window. A narrow window, but perhaps enough. He reaches the edge of the camp. His sword cuts through the first man who comes at him, a wild swing that opens the soldier from shoulder to hip. He spins, deflects a blow from his left, drives his elbow into an attacker's face, pivots and thrusts and kills again. Around him, his men fight with the desperation of those who know that retreat is impossible, that the only way out is through. And Abdul Rahman, hearing the commotion from the southern edge of the valley, abandons his observation post and leads his 5 men in a flanking attack that catches Yakid's forces from an unexpected angle. The valley becomes a whirlwind of steel and blood and screaming. Tarhan fights his way toward the center of the camp. His eyes are fixed upon Yakid, who has retrieved his sword with his left hand and is shouting orders to his men, trying to restore order to the chaos. But the damage has been done. The revelation of Difne's treachery, the sudden attack from multiple directions, the uncertainty about who can be trusted, all of these have shattered the discipline of Yakid's force. Men fight individually now, each one looking out for himself, the cohesion of the unit dissolved by confusion and fear. And Tarhan reaches him. The two men face each other across a space of perhaps 10 feet, surrounded by the swirling battle, islands of stillness in a sea of violence. Yakid's face is twisted with pain and fury. Blood streams from his wounded arm, but his eyes burn with the fire of a man who has nothing left to lose. He says, Tarhan, the faithful dog of the Orhan house, you should have stayed in Bursa. You should have let events take their course. Now you will die here in this valley, and your body will feed the crows. Tarhan says nothing. Words are wasted on men like Yakid. He raises his sword. He settles into his stance, and he waits. Yakid attacks first. Despite his wounded arm, his left-handed assault is fierce, a flurry of cuts and thrusts that test Tarhan's defenses to their limit. But Tarhan is the better swordsman. He has always been the better swordsman. He parries, deflects, gives ground strategically, waiting for the opening that he knows will come. And it comes. Yakid overextends on a thrust. His balance shifts forward, and Tarhan strikes. The blade takes Yakid in the side, sliding between the ribs, piercing something vital. Yakid gasps. His sword falls from his grip. He looks down at the blade protruding from his body, and then he looks up at Tarhan, and upon his face there appears an expression that is not fear, not even surprise, but something like recognition. The recognition of a man who has always known, somewhere in the depths of his soul, that this moment would come. He says, you think this ends it. You think killing me ends the war. But you are wrong. The seeds I have planted will continue to grow. The cracks I have exposed will continue to widen. And even from the grave, I will watch the house of Orhan crumble. Tarhan withdraws his blade. Yakid falls to his knees, and then to his side, and then he is still. And the battle ends. Without their leader, Yakid's soldiers lose their will to fight. Some surrender, throwing down their weapons and raising their hands. Others flee into the forest, disappearing into the darkness from which they came. The valley falls silent save for the groans of the wounded and the heavy breathing of the survivors. Tarhan stands over Yakid's body and looks down at the man who threatened everything he has sworn to protect. He feels no triumph. He feels no satisfaction. He feels only the hollow exhaustion that follows violence, the emptiness that remains when the fire of battle has burned itself out. Abdul Rahman approaches. His armor is dented, his face streaked with blood and sweat, but he is alive, and Tarhan is grateful for that mercy. Abdul Rahman looks at Yakid's body and says, "It is done then." Tarhan shakes his head slowly. He says, "No, it is not done. Yakid was right about one thing. He was not alone. There are others who supported him, others who funded him, others who hoped to profit from the chaos he created. We have won this battle, but the war continues." He looks around at the captured soldiers, at the wounded being tended, at the bodies of the fallen, both friend and foe. He says, "Secure the camp, question the prisoners, and find Difne. If she is still alive, she has information we need." And as his men move to obey, Tarhan walks to the edge of the camp and looks up at the sky. The moon is setting. The first hint of dawn touches the eastern horizon. A new day is coming. He thinks of Bursa. He thinks of the Sultan waiting for news. He thinks of Fatima, still grieving in her chamber. He thinks of a sporcher, standing at her window, wondering what the future holds. He thinks of all the lives that depend upon the strength of the house he serves, the thousands of souls who look to the house of Orhan for protection, for justice, for hope. And he knows that his work is not finished. It will never be finished. Not as long as there are enemies who plot in the darkness. Not as long as there are those who would tear down what others have built. Not as long as the eternal struggle between good and evil continues to play out in the hearts of men. He sheathes his sword. He turns back to the camp. And he begins the long process of gathering the pieces of this shattered night, preparing for the return to Bursa, preparing for the report he must deliver, preparing for whatever comes next. Because the war is not over. It is never over. And those who fight it must always be ready to rise again. And the dawn comes. It comes with its golden light and its promise of renewal. It comes with the song of birds and the stirring of the wind in the trees. It comes to a valley stained with blood and strewn with the wreckage of battle, and it illuminates the faces of the living and the dead alike, making no distinction between victor and vanquished. And Turhan stands in that light, and he breathes, and he gives thanks to God for his survival, and he prepares himself for the journey home. And the story continues. It will always continue. For as long as there are those who love and those who hate, those who build and those who destroy, those who hope and those who despair, the story will continue. And the house of Orhan will stand. It will always stand. Because it is built not upon stone alone, but upon faith. And faith endures. It always endures.